Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. A couple of years back, I had this real problem at the office. A lunch thief was constantly swiping my food from the break room fridge. I'd complained to HR every few times it happened like they asked, but those buzzards never did jack about it. So there I was, stuck buying crappy food from the vending machines again after my chicken salad sandwich went missing. Steamed, I vented to my doc during the yearly checkup. He got this sly grin and asked, "Constipation issues?" Clueless, I'm like, nah, why? That's when he wrote me a script for these thermonuclear laxative pills telling me to mix it into your lunch for maximum effect. Light bulb moment. The perfect revenge on Mr. Sticky Fingers. I won't lie, part of me wished the thief would have prairie dogged it right there in the halls, but nope, they just downed my special sauce avocado sandwich like nothing was amiss. Around an hour later, I double tapped HR. Not only was my lunch swiped again, but someone also took my medication from the fridge. Sharon, the HR lady, blinked a few times. "So the lunch perp also nabbed your meds that were in the same bag?" "Yep," I said with a straight face. "Doc prescribed this crazy laxative recently. He told me to mix it into my midday meal." She turned pale. You what?" I shrugged. "Hey, just following doctor's orders. Dosed my sandwich with some prescription-strength laxative." Well, that's when all hell broke loose. Stealing prescription meds is, a crime, so the cops got involved. Turned out the culprit was Larry, some bigwig from marketing or something, currently redecorating the bathroom in his trademark brown. Boy, was he pissed, accusing me of trying to poison him. "At what point," I asked, "did my lunch become your property?" I went on, "Also, thanks for taking my laxative meds I actually needed." By then, Larry had lawyered up and wasn't shooting his mouth off anymore. Small town, though, so the word traveled fast. Little while later, my pal Sean took over Larry's role after he got slapped with fines and community service. As for me, I could finally chow down on my hoagies in peace. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived on my family's land for as long as I can remember. My great-grandfather bought the property decades ago, and it's been passed down ever since. Our farm sits on 50 sprawling acres, most of which is dense forest and rolling pastures. At the heart of it all is the house my grandparents built with their own two hands. This place is my whole world. So when the Miller family moved into the old farmhouse next door, I was eager to welcome our new neighbors. I brought over a homemade pie and chatted with them about life out here in the countryside. They seemed like decent folks, Bill and Carol and their teenage kids. Little did I know the headaches they would cause me down the road. The problem started small at first. I'd notice one of their cows wandering onto my pasture or catch a glimpse of their quad bike bumping over the grass on my side of the property line. Annoying, sure, but nothing worth raising a stink over. I figured it was just honest mistakes by newbies still learning the lay of the land. So I brushed it off and gave them gentle reminders about minding the boundaries. Figured it would resolve itself soon enough. Well, I couldn't have been more wrong. One morning, I woke up to discover a huge pit dug along my north pasture. I walked over to investigate and found Bill operating a digger, churning up piles of dirt and rock. Turns out he was building himself a pond, and half of it was sitting squarely on my property. I called out, "Morning, Bill, what you working on over there?" He killed the engine on the digger and strolled over. "Oh hey, just putting in a pond for the kids to go swimming. Gonna stock it with some fish too, won't that be nice?" I peered down at the deep muddy trenches now scarring my field. "Yeah, sure, but it seems like some of this pond is on my land." Bill's smile faded. "Oh, I didn't think it would be a problem. My property line's just over there," he gestured vaguely. "And I need the pond to be this big for the proper ecosystem, you know?" I frowned, trying to keep cool. "I get that, but you really should have asked before digging on my property. I'm not comfortable with this." Bill scratched his head looking between me and the half-finished pond. Well, I can't really change it now. Tell you what. I'll throw in a little extra cash when I pay you for the land. Sound good?" I stiffened in shock. Pay me for the land that's already mine? Is this guy for real? I explained as calmly as I could that I had no intention of selling any portion of my property, especially not for a glorified mud hole. But Bill just chuckled and said we'd work it out later. Then he fired the digger back up and carried on excavating like I wasn't even there. Now at this point I was getting really steamed, but yelling wasn't gonna accomplish anything with this fella, so I got on the phone and called up Dave Snyder, an old family friend who works in land development. I told him what Bill was up to and asked what my options were. Dave came over promptly and took a look. He shook his head saying, "No permits. Too close to the property line. This thing violates every code in the book. I'll send a formal complaint to the county. In the meantime, document everything and tell this guy he better stop." So that's exactly what I did. Every day, I took photos of Bill's destruction from every angle. I filed complaints with the county board, documenting the lack of permits and code violations, which could result in steep fines down the road. And every chance I got, I told Bill he was breaking the law and needed to halt construction immediately. Well, my neighbor didn't take too kindly to all that. He cussed me out more than once, saying this was his property and his business alone. One time, he even shoved me after I tried blocking his digger, yelling that he'd flatten me into the dirt if I interfered again. I couldn't believe how hostile he was getting. I backed off after that, worried the man might actually get violent. But I kept documenting the situation, building an evidence file to prove exactly how much damage he was doing. It took about 2 weeks, but Bill finally finished his illegal pond. It was easily over an acre, laden with bulldozed debris and jagged rocks. He went ahead and stocked it with fish, invited his whole family over for a cookout celebration. They were all laughing and swimming around while I looked on in dismay. It didn't take long for Bill's shoddy landscaping to cause real problems. After a heavy rainfall, I noticed gullies forming in my north pasture where all the topsoil was washing away. The runoff from Bill's uncovered pond was blasting craters into the landscape. I confronted Bill about it, but he shrugged it off, saying, "Little erosion is normal with any pond, nothing I can do." But it kept getting worse every time it rained. Soon there were huge trenches carved across my field, scattered with rocks and roots from exposed trees. It looked like a disaster zone. My property value was plummeting by the day, so Dave came back to survey the damage. He worked up an estimate for repairs that was over $20,000. Armed with these facts, I sent formal notice to Bill saying he had 30 days to fix the erosion and restore my land. After that, I would be forced to sue for damages. Well, 30 days came and went with no action from my neglectful neighbor, so it was time to play hardball. I met with a lawyer named Richard who helped me file a lawsuit against Bill Miller for property damage, harassment, reckless endangerment, and more. We arranged professional photographers who used drones to capture the torn-up state of my land from every angle. I even had an expert write up a report calculating the long-term impact this erosion could have if left unchecked. Finally, the day came to meet Bill in small claims court. He seemed real cocky walking in, giving me a little wave like this was all a joke to him, but his smugness slipped away as my lawyer laid out our case piece by piece. The evidence was irrefutable. Illegal construction that violated county regulations and destroyed my property, plus multiple eyewitnesses and documentation of Bill's verbal and physical harassment when confronted. Bill's defense was pitiful. He claimed ignorance about property lines and permitting, saying he didn't think it was a big deal. He tried to pin all the erosion on natural causes, not his shoddy handiwork, but he had no evidence to back up his lame excuses. The judge saw right through Bill's BS. In the end, he ruled fully in my favor, ordering Bill to pay $28,000 in damages, plus the cost of fully restoring my land. He also forbade Bill from setting foot on my property ever again. The judgment was a huge relief after months of stress. Watching Bill's stunned expression as he got slapped with fines and restrictions was priceless. But the real victory came when a crew arrived to fix the destruction he had caused. It took them 2 weeks to fill in the trenches, remove the debris, and replant grass. When it was all finished, you could hardly tell my field had been ravaged at all. Bill avoided me after that humiliating defeat in court. Occasionally, I'll catch him glaring from across the fence. But he doesn't dare set foot on my property anymore, not unless he wants to explain himself to a judge again. His kids seem to enjoy their illegal pond, though it looks kinda pathetic now with its collapsing edges and murky water. Just an eyesore surrounded by my vibrant, beautiful land. In the end, justice was served. My field is restored, and Bill learned the hard way that he can't take what doesn't belong to him. It all goes to show you don't have to take abuse lying down, especially when it comes to your land. If somebody tries to walk all over you, stand up and fight for what's rightfully yours. The next one is a petty revenge story. Years ago, I worked as a cook for a greasy spoon-style restaurant just off the interstate, I-95, that was connected to a hotel. The boss that hired me was great, got his paperwork done during the slow part of the day in 15 minutes, and worked side by side with us. The company fired this manager and replaced him with an awful manager who didn't drive, lived 15 miles away, and had to take 2 city buses to get to work, so she was never on time. She was also a raving alcoholic, and it seemed to take her hours to do the same paperwork our old boss could do in 15 minutes. She abused everyone in the restaurant and power-tripped constantly, so one day I check my schedule, and I see I'm scheduled for 11. 7. As far as I knew, we weren't a 24-hour restaurant, so I show up at 11 a.m. for my shift and the manager asked why I was there. I told her she scheduled me from 11 to 7. Her reply was, my shift was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. because she was making our restaurant a 24-hour restaurant due to the hotel being attached to the restaurant. I worked the shift but looked for a different job as well. In the interim, the manager took 3 hours off my paycheck because she found out that I dozed for 15 minutes on the clock. Remember, she doesn't drive and buses don't run overnight where I am, so she had no way to determine how long I dozed off for, and the doors were unlocked too. I corrected the time card and she changed it back with a note saying, I am your manager. I finally found a better job and said nothing to anyone at work. However, on my last night, a Friday night, I refused to work. My boss tried to work my shift but couldn't stay awake to do it, and wound up calling in a few first shift workers early. She tried to give me grief about it when I stopped in to get my last check, but I just smiled and walked away. That restaurant ended up closing down too. I'd like to think her poor management had something to do with that. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I was in a supervisory role as a charge nurse. I'd worked in this position for about 3 years, I had great reviews, and earned consistent raises and performance bonuses. I approached my managers and requested that they agree to a flexible schedule if I worked on my master's degree. I wasn't asking for time off, I just wanted them to adjust my schedule when it came time for my practical rotations. They agreed as they wouldn't be losing any productivity and would be gaining a nurse practitioner for the system. About a year I started the program, it became apparent I was going to need to divorce my wife. We'd been married for many years. It was quite a blow. I called the Employee Assistance Program and got some therapy that was very helpful. My managers also suggested I apply for FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, leave due to their concern for my mental health. I was very grateful. I had been working for this system for a number of years and had many hours of PTO, paid time off, saved up. But I figured the FMLA leave would be a smart thing to be approved for in case court times were scheduled when I was working. I was approved for up to 40 hours per week for a year. About a year into my master's program, it became necessary for me to step down from my role as a charge and take a staff nurse position. My main manager was livid. She took it very personally and stopped talking to me and greeting me. I was very hurt initially. As my practical rotations were about to start, I reminded my managers of their promise to be flexible with my schedule. They denied my requests for flexibility and began to schedule me almost entirely for the times I would request off. At first, I was frustrated and very hurt that they did this, but I remembered that I was approved for FMLA leave. FMLA is a special form of leave and cannot be denied. As my managers were not keeping their promises, it was with great satisfaction I began to call off every morning I needed to for my rotations. I didn't give them any advance notice because I was not required to. It was with even greater satisfaction I learned my managers began to have to cover my shifts themselves on occasion. As I had PTO hours saved up, I still got paid as well. I finished all of my rotations in this manner and took a job at a different system after I graduated. I worked at the new system for a few years before I was hired back at my old system as a provider. I loved seeing the look on my old manager's face when I took my first shift at her hospital as a provider and not under her chain of command. The next one is an entitled people story. I had to fly to San Diego for work last week at 30-ish weeks pregnant. Bear with me, I know Reddit hates pregnant people, but I really think I handled this one the right way. I was flying American Airlines, and when you book your flight, you pick your seat. I booked a few weeks in advance and chose a seat that was towards the middle of the plane closest to the bathroom, and I selected an aisle seat. I paid $78 for my seat because it's considered a premium seat due to legroom. My return flight was a red-eye, and as I waited at the airport to check the seats for any closer to the restroom, I noticed that the row I selected as well as the one directly across were mostly empty. Great. I don't mind getting up to move for others on a flight. I usually would take the window seat, but due to being so far into pregnancy, I was advised by my OB to get up every 1-2 HRs and walk around to avoid the risk of blood clots. She also wanted me to drink a lot of water on the flight, hence the proximity to the bathroom. Because of this, I booked an aisle seat, partially for convenience, but also so I wouldn't have to bother or potentially wake sleeping passengers on an 8HR red-eye every 1-2 HRs to walk around or pee. Like I said, I paid a fee for this assigned seat. So boarding happens and I see that the flight has filled out a bit and now there are no empty seats in either row. No issue, I've made the necessary accommodations and I'm not relying on empty seats on anyone else to do any type of switch, so this doesn't impact me at all. If people need to get up and move, great, a reminder for me to get some steps in. I'm sitting in my seat, and the woman who will be taking the window seat boards, and we chat a bit, and she says not to worry, she won't be a bother, getting up and down as she plans to sleep, and I tell her not to worry, if she needs to get up, she won't be bothering me, and tell her I have to get up to walk anyway. Towards the end of boarding, a very tall man comes, and he's in the aisle helping a woman who is in the aisle seat next to mine, but like across the aisle if that makes sense, to put her bag in the overhead bin. At this point, I have my AirPods in, but I'm on alert as I'm aware there is someone in the middle seat and I'll have to get up and let them in. It becomes apparent that this man has the middle seat in my row while his wife has the aisle seat next to mine, so I am essentially sat right between them. I pull out my headphone and offer to switch aisle seats so they can sit next to one another. There is a bit of a language barrier, and she gestures next to her at a boy, maybe 8-10 years old, and says this is her son and she doesn't want to leave him alone in the row. So I nod and say, okay, totally makes sense, and stand to let her husband into the middle seat. Here's where I was called entitled. The man asked for me to switch with him so he can sit next to his wife. Thinking maybe it didn't register to him that I am pregnant, I jokingly gestured to my very obvious bump and explained the bathroom and the frequent walks. He says he doesn't mind, he will get up. I said no, I'm sorry. I paid for the aisle seat so that I would be able to get up and move freely as needed during the flight and not have to disturb anyone. He again insisted that he needed to be able to sit with his wife and child, and I suggested they speak to the flight attendant about moving seats. The FA obviously didn't have much of a solution for them, so they spent the entire flight leaning across me to talk to one another, passing drinks and snacks across my lap, blocking my laptop screen, and getting up and down frequently to make me suffer. Fine, whatever, doesn't bother me. However, when there started to be a frequency of elbows to my baby bump during their discussions, I let the FA know what was going on and they were told to stop reaching across me. My husband says I was entitled and playing the pregnancy card. Is he right? The next one is an entitled parent story. This happened when I was 15. If there is a more appropriate sub for this, please let me know. My mom and dad divorced when I was 9. Soon after, my mom married my stepfather. Summers and every other Christmas were spent out of state with my dad. The rest of the time I was with my mom. They did not have the nicest of splits in divorce, but both insisted, and kept to it, that they would not interfere with my younger brother and I relationship with the other parent. My stepfather did not agree to this, however, and did everything he could to sabotage our relationship with our father. My dad would call, and if my stepfather answered the phone, he would hang up on dad. He called my dad to demand more child support, or he would legally adopt us and my dad would never see us again. I had no real friends growing up because I did not want to bring people home. One day, while visiting my dad, we ordered some custom leather jackets to arrive about a month later. It came, and I found the box on the dining room table with "Return to Sender" written on it as if he had meant to send it back later. I grabbed it, stashed it in my room, and thankfully he forgot all about it. That night after dinner, as everyone was on the couch watching the evening news, I brought the package out, gave it to Mom, and asked her to explain why it was being sent back. My stepdad began to say that we couldn't afford it, to which I said everything had already been paid for. And why did he hang up on Dad when Dad called, and I said Dad had recordings of the threats to adopt us and prevent Dad from ever seeing us again. My stepfather began spinning a tale about how he just wanted us all to be one big family, and he knew how my mom didn't like my dad, and he did everything for the sake of the family. Then he caught me smiling, stopped, and asked me, "What the heck is so funny?" I said, "Dad has no recordings, but why does he need them when you just admitted to everything?" He said something unintelligible and jumped off the couch to lunge at me until my mom stopped him by getting in between us. Mom simply said, "Out," and he walked to the front door and let himself out. After we heard him drive away, Mom asked for the details about everything and apologized for bringing him into our lives. The next morning, I was walking to the bus for school when my stepfather quickly pulled up near me and stopped, then got out of the car and started walking towards me. I screamed like I've never screamed before or since. He got up to me, slapped me across the face, grabbed my shirt, and started walking me to his car. I didn't go peacefully, though, screaming and resisting the whole way. That's when my savior appeared. An older gentleman had seen everything and came out of his house with quite possibly the largest hand cannon I have ever seen outside of the movies. He just saw an older man dragging a screaming teen girl to his car. He told my stepdad to stop, pointed his gun at him, and got him to kneel down with his ankles crossed and to intertwine his fingers behind his head, so I believe he was former military. Isn't that how you are taught to take prisoners? I don't know for sure. His wife had also seen everything and called the police, then came out and began soothing me. When the police arrived, 2 cars, 4 officers in total, my savior put his gun down and raised his hands to show the police he meant no harm to them, that he was not a threat. His wife said that she was the one who called and said that she and her husband had seen a man pull up. grab a young girl, and began dragging her to his car when they decided to interfere for my safety. I then confirmed the story, but did not mention he was my stepfather. The police asked for IDs and noted that my student ID, all I had at the time, had a different last name and had no sign of the name my stepfather was calling me. At the time, I went by my middle name, but my student ID had my actual first name, and I had kept my original last name, so it was different than his, despite his attempt to claim he was my father and was just disciplining me for something. He was handcuffed and taken away in one of the cars while the other car drove me to school. I had missed the bus by this time, where the officer went in and told the attendance office lady that I had been the victim of an attempted kidnapping, and that's why I was late. He later showed up after school to give me a ride home and stayed in the house with me until my mom got off work and came home. My brother, who was unaware of my day's adventures, came home, and me, my brother, and the officer played video games until my mom got home. My mom and stepfather later divorced. When I was at school a couple of days later, my stepfather came by the house with a police escort and my mom's supervision and got his personal stuff. My mom was later able to get a restraining order against him for herself, me, and my brother. Haven't heard from my former stepfather since. My brother still lives with his family in our hometown and saw that my savior had just passed away and decided to tell me, and he told me to put my story here. I have never posted here before, so sorry if I have done something wrong. I know you're not supposed to glorify violence here, but I don't know how to tell the story without it. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.